Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Hello fellow writers. So today I wanted to talk about the process of writing a book, more so that it's personal. I think and I have my notes here in case you're wondering, but I think too many people get in their head about how to write a book. Some people just want to put a story down or just come up with a story even, and they think that there's one size fits all type of formula for every single person out there, and that if you follow this formula you're gonna have the best book ever, and it's gonna be so easy. I really think that you don't need a perfect formula to write a book. Of course, for the technical side of writing, that's different. There are definitely steps, formula for all of that. I mean, you gotta have structure, how to write dialogue, how to format, you space out your paragraphs, character perspectives. I'm not talking about the technical side like that. I'm talking about you may have a story in mind, or you want to come up with a story, with an idea, and actually get it down from start to finish, that process. And the reason why I say it doesn't have to be a perfect formula, because you could start with the outline or not. You could start at chapter 1 or on the last chapter or the middle of the book. Starting from chapter 1 doesn't guarantee that you'll do it correctly. That doesn't mean that you're doing it correctly. You don't have to start from chapter 1, but it can be helpful. You have the beginning, middle, the end. You start from that. But some people actually go backwards. That brings me to the first question, which is, how should you write? Well, it would depend. Are you someone who needs outlines, plan all the chapters, all the little details? Or are you someone who discovers as they write? You could start with a setting. Maybe you came up with a city that there's something odd about the city, or maybe there's nothing odd about it, but you just created a whole town in your head, and now you want to fill it with characters and a story. I don't see anything wrong with that. Could be a perfect way to start a book. Or you have characters. You don't really have a setting or an idea. I used to actually come up with different characters, their names, ages, their jobs, and what they looked like. But I didn't have a story for them. I just would come up with that and write it down in case anyone would want it. And I know some people start like that. Other people start with a problem. Saving the world. And you may have a cast of characters these 3 people in their 30s who met at a book club, or these 2 teenagers who met at the school dance, and then you come up with a problem for them to solve. That is a perfect way to begin. Because not every idea is a good idea, in my opinion, or at least for me. And then I'm okay, let me think on that more. Let me daydream about it. I want to see the scenes in my head to make sure that's a story I would want to write about. I've come up with a lot of storylines that, after I guess workshopping it in my mind, it's not something I would want to write, because it's not something I would want to read. I try to write what I would want to read. So I have a filter. I have to filter through those ideas. So you have to find your own style. That's why it's personal. Your process could start out with a cast of characters or just one. You could be trying to figure out what that person wants in life, their goals, and then build a story from there. I wanted to give an example though. I have a story about an aspiring model and her experience in the modeling industry. The way that story started, so I said that I like to make random characters, right? I had a character, don't remember her name, but her character was that, I don't know where she lived, but she grew up with a single father because her mom lived in a different country, and she really wanted to go and reunite with her mom. That was a separate thing. And then I had a dream about someone who's an actual model in real life doing this like weird photo shoot in an attic. I don't even know. It was just really weird. Even in my dream, the model was like, what the heck is happening? Like, why? What type of photo shoot is this? Like, this feels weird. And I combined those two separate random things together about a story. For a story about a woman from a small town in Texas getting the chance to move to New York City to be a model and like trying out that model life, you know, and seeing her experience navigating the modeling industry and all that type of stuff. Completely random. Who says you can't do that? Who says you can't patch up random things from, wherever into a story? That's a process. That's not something I would usually do. But if you're holding yourself onto this, this has to work a certain way, this process is only this way, you may miss out on a whole lot more interesting ideas out there because you think you have to follow this 4-step plan or this 10-step plan that is way too rigid for you, I don't work with stuff like that. That's something I look at afterwards to kind of compare what I have onto it and then make changes. I don't think you need to start a book a certain way. You don't need to, I have to write out the plot before I can do this and figure out that. No. What are your ideas? Put your ideas down. Look at it. Start connecting and putting things. Like, don't think so much about it that you're spending more time thinking than writing. Hello. You want to write? Then write. And what amazes me is when I see published authors and like professionals who have been writing for years, and they'll say the same thing. And I think it makes sense because that is what makes you a writer in the first place, is writing. You gotta be able to spell it out from start to finish. You gotta be able to just follow through, to see it, to have it, Before, I didn't outline. I didn't even write out a plot. I didn't even write out a summary, okay? I just started writing, just boom, boom, boom. I'm not someone who has a problem with starting at all. Get an idea, I just put the words out, whether physically writing it or typing it. It was never a problem for me. I write, I started to discover more about the characters and the setting or the plot itself. Like, that's how I figure things out through the drafts, which feels like it takes so much longer to get to a finished product, which it does. But that's the way that I'm able to really see the story, is when I write it out, read it, and then I can figure out what works and what doesn't. But having the outline is like leaving myself breadcrumbs or having a road, a pathway to go through. Because with my contemporary fantasy novel that I'm working on right now, it started with a scene. I saw a scene of like the kids being called by their mom because their friends, who are also their neighbors, were calling them to come play like in the forest that they live near. That was what I saw. Like, I don't know. And the story did come from that, but it was originally supposed to be a 10-chapter short story, like 1,000 words each. I don't know why, but that's what I wanted to go off of. Obviously, it's not that anymore. Definitely not 10 chapters, definitely not a short story, definitely not 1,000 words per chapter, that's for sure. But the crazy thing is, those 10 chapters are like that. The structure of those 10 chapters is still part of the story now. It does start with the kids out on a little adventure together, And this still ends with them restoring something that was lost. And throughout that, they hit obstacles, they learn more about each other, they get mad at each other, they learn a lot, lose a lot. So it's like the core shell, I guess, or skeleton of the story is still there, each draft, because I wrote that out. And I wasn't doing it for that, but, well, I didn't know it at the time, but that's what it is. However, for like my mystery thriller, right? Completely different, because it started with an idea I got from either Instagram or a YouTube comment. Completely random. That's how it is a lot of times. But it came to me like an idea of, oh, it'd be so interesting to write a book about someone saying another person looks like someone. And then it turns out they know that someone. And there's like something sinister in between. And in this video, I wrote out the like entire plot. I just got my notebook, and because from that idea, I saw it from beginning to end. I have made some additions. I won't say changes necessarily. I've just fluffed it up a lot more. I beefed it up, you know? But what I wrote down is still largely what I'm going to write. But it became a problem when I would get writer's block, because I didn't know what was supposed to happen next, because I didn't have an outline, I didn't have a road, or I guess outlines for me is like a map, right? I didn't have any of that to go off of. I was just creating the story as I went, and I didn't know what was supposed to happen next. I lost the plot, you know? And another way to look at it is, what do you struggle with? My struggle is being satisfied enough with the plot to continue. So how did I fix that? Creating an outline after I've written some parts of the story, whether it's one scene, two scene, or like a bare bones page of a scene. So I need an outline after I've already started writing, basically. And then my sci-fi, that I wrote that like a decade ago, I want to say. No, more than a decade ago, I believe. When I was in like high school or middle school, early high school, I don't even know exactly when. But I got that idea also from another movie. And it was an idea / plot a little bit, but I just started writing, okay? I didn't have an outline, didn't have a summary, I just wrote. And the story still begins largely the same way. Like someone is missing, and yeah. But I've made the missing aspect a bigger focus now than before. Before, that was just a way for these characters to meet, but now it's like they're looking for that person, and they connect to like a larger investigation that's happening. Some scenes have changed, but the characters are still the same, I think. I've added a few, but I think I've more so changed what those characters are. Didn't have an outline, just started with an idea. And the thing about that story is I'm so lost. I wrote 50% of it and then started it again. I have restarted that story so many times because it's like Well, the first time was because the POV was wrong, and a very kind beta reader was able to point that out for me and give me some articles to look at to show the difference between head hopping and like third person omniscient point of view. Then I wrote a 54 chapter outline. I got to like chapter 20-ish, and I'm like, I want to restart this already. But I don't know what the problem is. I don't know. I just need to stick with that outline and then like finish it and then go back to change it. Because the thing is, I wouldn't have been able to see the issues if I didn't start off writing from this outline. And that's my point for me, is that I don't feel like I have to stick to it. So when I write an outline now, I know that it's not this isn't really the story. This is just the path for me to discover the story, you know? So that's a process that's personal to me. Someone else may not need that. I do. It's just the way that my brain works. I just need to start with a path and then discover it from then on. Like, you know, again, the breadcrumbs. The reason why I didn't write outlines was because how do I know what's going to happen next if I don't write it? Well, you know, working on certain chapters, I don't have to like force myself to write like other people. I just gotta write like myself, right? And that's how I've been able to finish different projects, how I've been able to finish this contemporary fantasy novel. I'm literally on draft 5. I've done 4 drafts of this. And I've finished 4 other story ideas that I've had, one of which I've edited multiple times. I don't have a problem necessarily with getting from the first chapter to the last chapter, because I've done that multiple times. That's not a problem. But compared to the amount of ideas I've like abandoned, like projects that I've stopped halfway through, like the sci-fi one, for example, because of that issue of not really liking it enough to continue. So it's like, I could have so much more done as well. And I will. And that's why I'm applying this knowledge for my mystery thriller as well, you know? I have an outline, but it started with an idea. Played around with the idea in my mind. Then I just wrote out the plot to see. I think it was supposed to be an actual outline, but I just wrote it out as I saw it in my head. And that was 2 years ago. And since then, I've been coming up with like characters and the setting more and other things. And it wasn't until late last year, maybe earlier this year, that I actually did a chapter by chapter outline. Just outlining like the entire story from start to finish. And it works. And now I'm on chapter 3 because it's gonna be chapter 4. And I feel like that is going by really fast. I'm actually really surprised to even be on chapter 4 while I'm editing the contemporary fantasy novel, because that's a lot too. Like, what? Anyways, so what do you struggle with? And how can you solve that? And maybe by figuring out how to solve it, you may discover what your process is to write a book, because it is personal. Another thing is also thinking about what you enjoy. I like anything fun and exciting. So when I'm like trying to think about my characters, how they are, where they live, what they dress, or how they dress, what type of music they like, or just the different decisions that they would make, I like to do different fun things that will help me to understand it. So recently I did a 90s day, right? Because for the mystery thriller, it's set in the 90s. And while I was born in the 90s, I wasn't a teenager in the 90s. So it was kind of loud at this part. So I just wanted to explain that I had a 90s day with my nieces. So we were going to places that my character would be at. So for example, my character works at a diner. So we went to like a diner style restaurant so I could take notes and kind of get a feel of how she would be in that environment. We also went to a bookstore, and while I was there, that's when it really helped, because she's trying to be an actress. And then I started thinking, what type of monologues would she use at an audition? That's not something I thought of before. I didn't even consider that. But while I was in that aisle for film and theater, I realized That might give some insight into her personality. What type of music does she listen to? What would her apartment look like, you know? What type of posters would she have on the board or on her walls? So eventually I would have come to those questions. But doing that 90s day, which isn't objectively necessary, but necessary for my process, is part of it. Doing that gave me insight into the character before I even write or put like any words down to the character, right? So now when I am writing, I don't have to stop and go back to figure those things out. Everyone has their own way of discovering these things about themselves. Eventually, I was like, I want to take it a little more seriously in terms of the quality, right? And so that's when I started doing more research and like studying books that I read and watching more videos about it, reading like different articles online about it to see what information I was missing, which is quite a bit, and that's fine. Some information may come to people automatically or it may be really obvious, and for others, they discover it after a lot of research. And so there are some things that I didn't really realize until looking it up and really like wanting to be more serious about the writing aspect and not just caring more about the story. And I think that's why my process is very different, and I'm very focused on like having fun. I just try not to take things too seriously because I just don't. I just don't. That's why the process is personal. You gotta figure it out. And you don't have to believe everything that I will say. You don't have to believe what I say. This is more sharing my opinion on how the writing process goes for me. And I really do think it is a personal thing. Again, I'm not talking about the technical side. Do not misunderstand me. Some people have problems comprehending. Don't be one of those people. So that's what I have to say. I hope this was helpful in some way or fashion. And stay tuned for a writing vlog.